Welcome to the Plant Trainers Podcast, where we're helping people improve their quality of life through nutrition and fitness. And now, your hosts, nutrition and wellness coaches, international speakers, Adam and Shoshana Chaim.
Hey, I'm Adam Chaim.
And I'm Shoshana Chaim, and we are
Propelled by Plants. Today we bring to you episode 398, 7 Core Principles for Healing with Dr. Sachin Patel.
In this episode of the Plant Trainers Podcast, we talk with Sachin Patel, formerly known as Doctor, about the 7 core principles for healing. Sachin gave up his doctor's rights as he felt that the medical system wasn't allowing him to practice the way that he wanted and give patients the tools that they needed for prevention in lifestyle as the medicine. We had a great time talking about the intention of your actions and how important vocabulary is. We talked about his 7 core principles for the mind-body approach for healing. And we think that they're so basic in some ways, but also so profound. And you're probably doing a lot of these things already, but we think that you're going to think about it on a different way, take it to the next level, or even find something new to start fresh with today. So this is perfect to share with anyone outside of the plant-based world because there'll be something for everyone.
Sachin is a father, husband, philanthropist, functional medicine practice, success coach, speaker, author, and plant medicine advocate. Sachin is convinced that the doctor of the future is the patient, and he's committed himself to help others raise their consciousness, activate their inner doctor, initiate their deepest healing through the use of lifestyle and breathwork. Sachin founded the Living Proof Institute, through which he pioneered a revolutionary approach to patient-centered healthcare. Sachin coaches hundreds of practitioners around the world so that they are empowered to deliver affordable and inspired care to their communities through his Perfect Practice Mentorship Program. He's an advocate of transforming the healthcare paradigm, and he has devoted his life to the betterment of healthcare for both patients and practitioners. Enjoy the show.
Research is all the buzz with weighted blankets right now, perfect for insomniacs with racing minds, sleepers who toss and turn, those who wake up many times at night, and those stressful days or anxiety that keep coming up for you. Check it out at planttrainers.com/hush, HUSH, and use the coupon code PLANTTRAINERS, all one word, all capitals, PLANTTRAINERS at checkout.
And now for a moment of gratitude.
I am grateful for you. You're a great role model to the kids. You're always exercising, taking them with you, setting a really great example for a family, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I am grateful for the assistant that I have right now who's helping me with a lot of the editing of these podcasts, saving me time from the editing and letting me focus on other things that are important in my life.
Sachin, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers Podcast today.
Well, Adam and Shoshana, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited to spend this time with you and educate our listeners.
We're excited for what you're going to educate us in today, too. I'm really looking forward to it. Before we get into it, is there something today that you're grateful for in this world?
Thanks for asking. I appreciate that. Well, I'm really grateful for more time with family. And I just found out my son's going back to school tomorrow. They're opening up the schools again. And so I was grateful for the time that I got to spend with him and trying to squeeze out as much of that time together as possible today. Yesterday, actually, interestingly enough, we were doing some video editing. So I was teaching him how to do video editing and stuff like that. And he sent me his first invoice. So I'm grateful that my 10-year-old is turning into like a little entrepreneur, and he had to rewrite it a bunch of times because he didn't know how to do it. And by the end of it, he got it and got the money. So I'm grateful that he's grown up, and I'm able to witness the little entrepreneur in him budding as well.
I think so many people are forgetting that moment. All their kids are going to go back to school, and they're like, yes, they're going back to school, but then they're going to realize, oh, I had all that time with them, and now they're back at school. I don't have that time anymore. I should have taken better advantage of that. So I think people are really going to reflect differently when that happens for everybody, because it's happening over the next few weeks from when we're recording this. So that's pretty crazy. It's true.
And I guess you're not the only one teaching your kid how to edit.
Right.
So tell us about your journey to finding a plant-based lifestyle and what that meant for you at the time.
Thanks for asking that too. I grew up in a vegetarian home, And so plants were a big part of our diet, but particularly grains were a big part of our diet, to be totally transparent and honest. And, we would have some dairy products in our diets, and that was the extent of it. No eggs or anything like that, but mainly it was a dairy. And I, from a very young age, didn't really like dairy. It didn't agree with me. I grew up and realized I was lactose intolerant, so it was pretty easy to eliminate that from my diet. And as a practitioner, I went through a variety of different phases myself, experimenting with different diets, experimenting with introducing animal proteins into my diet, and all that to be able to speak to it from a place of knowing and a place of experience. And what I quickly realized is that I actually felt better more on a plant-based diet. So for me, the revelation was, hey, I can feel just as good eating a plant-based diet the right way, because I, for many years, did it wrong, eating a lot of like soy-based products and those fake meats and soy milk and all those things that now you couldn't pay me to do. These were the staples, because one of the things I enjoy doing is working out. And when you're young, all you hear about is protein, protein, protein. And if you're not getting it from, meats and animal protein sources, then you've got to find vegetarian sources. And so you end up going down that rabbit hole of fake meats. And, what you realize over time is, hey, these things are really processed and they're not actually good for you, but you grow and you learn through those experiences. And so for me, it's been primarily vegetarian my entire life. Went through a phase of eat whatever I want that's healthy diet, or eat whatever I want that I'm recommending to potentially patients and guiding them through. And in the functional medicine world, the big thing with diet is incorporating, some animal proteins. So that was part of the recommendations that we would give initially to help people transition and eat healthier, at least, because getting people to go from eating unhealthy meats to getting them to eat healthy meats was hard enough, but getting them to cut it out would be like way too big of a step for them. So I went through a phase where I'm like, let me experiment with this and see how I feel, just so I can speak to this intelligently and understand it a little bit better. And so I went through a phase where I did eat animal proteins, and then very quickly realized that, hey, this doesn't really align with me. It doesn't really, and it was almost like something that was not part of my character. And that's not to say that people who eat animal proteins are out of character, but it just didn't suit me. And so, what I stuck to and what I stick to now is primarily, I would say, a 99% plant-based diet. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier before we started recording, there will be the occasional animal protein that sneaks in the form of like butter or ghee or something like that. That if I'm eating at somebody's house, then I just try to be present and feel the love that they put into the food. And in our culture, that can be very insulting when you turn down somebody's food. So I just kind of avoid the scenario altogether. And so in our house, we don't have any animal protein products. We're 100% vegan at home, and we're pretty much home now 99% of the time, it feels like. So that tends to be pretty easy for us.
And when you do end up getting that touch of butter or something like that in there, do you feel different from that little bit? Can you feel that difference in your body?
I'm going to say no. It's so rare that it happens, and it's so infrequent that it happens, and the dosage is usually pretty small. And I think I've built up a lot of reserve and resilience. So for me, I don't feel like it really impacts me in a negative way, which can be dangerous, right? If you don't have good self-control. But for me, like my family members now, like my immediate family members know that, hey, we avoid dairy and eggs and things like that. So it's been pretty easy and infrequent to get those exposures for me.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning, our parents would try so hard, but they would forget. And one ingredient would go in and they would forget, and they go, oh my God, yes, I forgot about eggs. Or, oh, I thought I used the margarine instead of the butter. And, those, sometimes there can be margarine that does have dairy in it, right? So those small little things kind of slipped up, and then like you see there, all the white drain from their face. So yeah, people do try their best. Absolutely. So I was really, really interested when I was looking on your Instagram. I saw a quote from you, and I really wanted to have the opportunity to discuss this with you. And it said, if you're trying to beat disease, more likely you're beating up your body in the process. So talk to us a little bit about that. I find it so profound, and really it's about the mindset of how people are going about healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Words are everything. It all starts with the words that we use in our mind, and also the words that we articulate. And many of us may not realize this, but the English language is actually very semantically sabotaging. So the words that we think we're using and the way we're using them will actually create sometimes the opposite effect of what we're trying to do. So when somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want to beat this cancer, or I want to beat my diabetes, or I want to fight this, right? Or there's a war on cancer, or a war on diabetes, or a war on even corona or whatever. And that's really the opposite approach of the body. The body is never at war with itself, right? It's really at war with its environment, or not even at war, but it's intelligently adapting to whatever environment we put it in. And so instead of trying to beat a condition, understand it and work with your body so that your body is now used as a tool for the healing to take place. You know, all disease is in response to an internal or external environment and emotion and repetition. So it's the things that we do over and over again, the things that we think over and over again are going to be what produce a result for us. So a lot of people will see this, and we'll even hear people say stuff like this, like, you know, I love my kids to death, or I love myself to death. And you see that, right? Like you see what people put in their shopping carts, and yeah, they do love their kids to death. Now, we know what they're trying to say, but what they're actually saying is the opposite of what they're trying to say and the message they're trying to get across. So our mantra is stop loving yourself to death, love yourself to life. And when we reframe it that way, people really see that. And then they can, whatever health methodology they're using, they view it as an act of self-love. And that really changes the intention that they put into what they're doing. So when they're making food, it's an act of self-love. When they're, you know, moving their beautiful bodies, it's an act of self-love. When they're communicating with other people, it's an act of self-love. All these things now become present to a different language, a different nomenclature. And again, the body's never trying to fight you. Your body wants to be healthy. It wants nothing else. And it takes up a lot of energy and a lot of effort for it to produce disease. But again, the disease is a reaction to the things that we think and say and put in our bodies over and over again, and the emotion we attach to them as well.
That's so interesting. And there's so much in there. And I'm thinking about when people say, I'm going to eat some junk food, or I'm going to eat some crap. We know it's food that's not what we want to be eating, that it's not part of our normal diet. We know that it's not going to serve our body, but sometimes people want a piece of licorice or, you know, a couple of chips. So do you think that there is a difference in the way people's bodies will react, the way their mentality will change, the way that they might choose to eat or not eat those foods as often if they stopped calling it junk food and stopped calling it crap and giving it those bad words and kind of just calling it as it is? I'm going to have some chips. I'm going to have some piece of cake. Or yesterday I ate way too many chips. Do you think that when we're talking about those foods that aren't serving the body, that could have an impact in the way that we use our vocabulary?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the intention that we put into anything makes a difference. So, for example, if two people made the exact same meal with the exact same ingredients and infused a different intention into it, you're going to be able to taste the difference, right? When you're really in tune with your body, you can taste the difference. And then this is also another reason why we pray over our food or why we acknowledge our food, is because we can then infuse an intention into it. One of the things that I've learned over the years, kind of studying the human brain and neurotransmitters and things like that, is that most of us will eat junk food if we have other forms of junk coming in, right? So like attracts like. So if we're consuming junk content, we're more likely to consume junk food because they're just energetically paired with one another, right? You can't be watching junk on TV and then you're not going to be attracted to eating healthy food, because energetically and vibrationally, those things are out of alignment from one another. And I think it's important that we start viewing our bodies as a temple and asking ourselves some important questions, some filtering questions, you know, one of them being, why am I eating this? Right? If you think about consuming empty content, you're going to consume empty calories. And so what we eat is a fractal representation of other areas of our life, right? So if we're willing to put junk into our bodies, we're probably willing to put junk in our cars, junk in our businesses, junk in our relationships, in a sense, willing to compromise all areas of our life if we're compromising what's going into our body. And we're inviting more of that to happen as well.
I think a lot of people don't pay attention. There's no mindfulness about what they're doing. Such a fast-paced world right now. Everybody's doing things in such a rush, want to hack things. So they don't really take the few minutes that it might take or the seconds that it might take to pay attention to what they're actually putting in their body or they're actually consuming content-wise. So I think that's a really important piece of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And like dopamine is the thing that these manufacturers are after, right? So, you have scientists that are spending years of their life, the best years of their life, and they're taking all that brain power and trying to figure out how do we hack into people's dopamine centers, their pleasure centers. And, with that short-term pleasure, oftentimes can come long-term pain and discomfort. So retraining the brain, retraining the palate, all these things are vital. And people need to understand that the greatest tool that we possess is the mind. And that's what everyone is after, right? So when people are feeding you food, certain junk foods, for example, they're not after your body, they're after your mind. When you're seeing things on TV, they're not after your wallet, they're after your mind. Like when you see advertisements, because the mind is the most powerful. This is why companies spend billions upon billions of dollars marketing to us, because once we can hijack somebody's mind, then we essentially hijack their entire life.
And going back to that intention of creating the food, we've spoken about this before. When Adam had his tumor and his heart disease and he decided to go completely plant-based, we had some help in the house. It's very expensive for daycare here for 2 children. So instead of sending the kids to daycare, we had help in the house, and she would help with some of the meals as well. So when we stopped buying the meat and she was taking part in the meals with us, and that wasn't her culture, she didn't understand, she didn't want to eat all of these vegan meals, she would prepare the meals and we would kind of feel sick after, and we'd be like, why are we so bloated? Why is our stomach upset? Where like the week before, one of us had prepared the exact same food and we had felt fine. So it's the same ingredients, it's the same house, but the intention, she felt a lot of negativity towards the foods that we were in a way forcing her to eat, right? She was free to leave the house and eat what she wanted, but when she ate with us, those were the meals. And we felt that she was also going through a hard time at the time, waiting for her papers to come in to bring her family here. So there was so much negativity there. Have you done any research into writing words into the labels of clothing and how the body reacts? Have you heard about that, and have you researched that at all?
Well, I haven't researched that, but I can only imagine what that does. I've studied Dr. Emoto's work, and when you can write something on a bottle, for example, like it's really interesting. He did an experiment for those that may not be familiar with this, but he put rice in 3 different containers, and on one container they wrote hate, on the other one they wrote love, and the third one they completely ignored. And so now what they did is they tracked to see which container of rice spoiled the fastest. And most people might think it was the hate, but it was the one that was actually ignored, spoiled the fastest. So even negative attention is better than no attention, for example, and positive attention obviously had the most positive outcome. So we have something called intention jars. I actually have one here. I put a lot of my stuff in it, so you can see that there's positive words that have been infused into here. And these are all my pens that I write with. So, there's positivity that's being infused into the pen. So when I'm taking notes, when I'm writing a letter to somebody, a thank you card, birthday card, it's being infused with that intention. I drink out of these jars in the morning. So every morning and evening, I pause and I pay attention to the jar and infuse that intention into my body. Our spices and things like that are stored in these jars as well. I'll have to send you a set. And basically kind of piggybacks off Dr. Emoto's work. And most of the clothing I wear is Lululemon. And one of the things that you'll notice on the inside labels on the bottom of your shirts, there's actually some motivational words in there. And I'm wondering if they're hip to that knowledge that words infused into anything. And it's really not just a word, but it's the intention, right? It's the intention is what amplifies the word, if you will. So if we put the words on the bottle, but then ignore them, right? It's the same thing as ignoring it. Whereas if we then use that as a way of reminding us and infusing that intention into what we do, then I feel like it could be a very powerful tool. But I haven't studied the clothing, but I can only imagine piggybacking off of some of the other work that's being done out there, that it would probably be very, very powerful.
Super interesting. Ask Adam what I'm going to do when we get off this call.
I love that approach.
I'm going to run around with a Sharpie.
Yeah, I love that approach. It's such a great idea. And it really is another tool to help the body heal itself. And we mentioned earlier that the body is really designed to take care of itself and heal itself, but there's so many external factors that are contributing to disease. And we know you have some principles that you wanted to share with us today in helping our bodies heal well. So let's go through some of those principles if we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my wife and I work together, and what we do is we help people using lifestyle principles. So our current medical system, just to give context to people, is really an 80-20 split where the patient does 20% of the work, the doctor, the physician, the practitioner ends up doing 80% of the work, which is creating a diagnosis, doing the blood work, interpreting, giving some guidelines, and then the patient may or may not follow. And we feel like that's a really failing model because the onus and responsibility is delegated to the practitioner when in reality it should be delegated back to the patient themselves. And our mantra is that the doctor of the future is actually the patient. And that's the only solution that we have to our healthcare crisis. It's not more doctors, it's not more labs, it's not making it free. Like people get excited because we have free healthcare, but what do we have free access to? Right? It's like having free access to a bad mechanic, right? Who never fixes your car. And if you took a healthy person through the medical system, you would actually make them sicker. So there's nothing in that system that makes a healthy person healthy. It actually makes a healthy person unwell. So how can it make an unwell person healthy? It truly can't, right? You just reach a ceiling of how much your health can improve under that model of care. So our philosophy is how do we decentralize and democratize health, and how do we put it back into people's homes? And what we realize is that none of this is taught in school, and it has to be intentional, right? So there's three things that we believe are left out of our school system. One is finances. Any meaningful knowledge around finances is not there. The second one is how to grow your own food. Because if I don't teach you how to grow your own food, if I don't teach you what real food is, I can feed you garbage and you're going to be lining up with a whole grocery cart full of junk because you don't know what real food is, thinking you're nourishing your body. And then using this reductionistic model of a food label, thinking that represents everything that food is. We don't realize that food is 5-dimensional, right? There's an emotional component to the food. There's a nutritional component to the food. There's an energetic, spiritual component to the food. So food has multiple dimensions to it, and we can't reduce it down to a food label. And the other thing that they don't teach us in school is anything meaningful about health, right? We have all these years sitting at a desk, learning stuff we're never going to use. Meanwhile, at the expense of things that we absolutely need. And then you realize as you get old and mature, you realize, hey, these are the most lucrative industries in the world. So our economy actually depends on people being broke and unhealthy and not knowing what real food is or having the capacity to grow their own food. And so learning that and just kind of witnessing that and seeing that, we saw why people are sick, right? And people think our healthcare system is broken. I believe the healthcare system is fixed. It's fixed in such a way that it does exactly what it's designed to do: delegate your wellness, delegate health. And the greatest threat to our healthcare system is healthy people. So, it cripples the system. And right now we're realizing that our healthcare system can't even help sick people, right? So what is it good for? It can't help healthy people. It can't help sick people. So what use does it have? We need to come up with a new model, not insurance coverage, not more funding. It's really changing the fundamentals of how we view health and whose responsibility it ultimately is. And I think that what's happening right now is kind of shining light on that. And, the people that don't have confidence and certainty or any awareness of how their body works are being very easily manipulated and put into a state of fear, which puts our amygdala in a state of just being sympathetic dominant. And when we're sympathetic dominant, we're always then looking to outsource and delegate all the thinking, because when we're sympathetic dominant, we're in our reptilian brain, not in our prefrontal cortex, which is what separates us from all the other animals on the planet.
I just wanted to pop in here to say that sleep is everything. And if you've heard about weighted blankets lately, you know what they can do. If you're someone with a lot of stress, if you're someone who's not sleeping throughout the night, if you're someone who needs to perform better throughout the day, check it out, because Hush blankets are reducing stress, lowering cortisol, increasing happiness. They are a tactile bliss. The blankets are covered with a super soft minky thread, which our son loves and refuses to go to sleep without at night. The inner blanket is made from a super comfortable microfiber material, and that means that you could sleep directly under it. So if you're someone who's too lazy to do laundry, don't worry. because they've got you covered. Check out planttrainers.com/hush, that's HUSH, and use the coupon code, all capitals, plant trainers, one word, PLANTTRAINERS at checkout for an amazing Plant Trainers discount. And now back to the show.
And so when we're in our reptilian brain, not in our prefrontal cortex, we can't even think for ourselves. We literally, from a blood flow neurological standpoint, can't think for ourselves. And so people are just trapped in this painful to watch cycle. And the only way to break them free is to really delegate that responsibility of health back to them. That's the only solution, right? There's no system that can save you from yourself. Like, that has to be your decision that you want to live your absolute best life.
That's always been the challenge. I find that people don't want to make the change because that's too difficult, right? They always want to find the easy route, which is why they go to the healthcare system, because the doctors are supposed to be taking care of them when all they're doing is giving them medication and pills, which is not getting to the root of the problem. It's just covering the symptoms. And so finding a way to have individuals become more responsible for their health seems to be the biggest challenge that we're facing in this perspective or in this model that you're speaking about.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And it's been my experience that when people pay, they pay attention. And, what we go after and who we like to serve is people who we don't have to convince that their health is important and that it's valuable, and that, the action steps that they take now are going to be passed on from generation to generation to generation. So I'm, really not in the business of helping people see that light. It has to be them that wants to not drown. And I learned a long time ago, you can't help somebody who wants to drown and who doesn't want to swim to the shore, right? So I gave up on those people a long time ago, and all I could do is work on myself, lead by example. And if people want to follow along, then certainly they could do that, because it is painful. It is difficult to pull people up the hill. And it's almost like pushing them up a hill with a noodle. It doesn't work, right? So we have to really identify those people that want that help, that are looking for that help, that are coachable, that are looking to make an improvement. And sometimes that means that there's going to be some pain in their life that they're trying to avoid, or discomfort that they're trying to avoid, and that's their wake-up call. For others who are more aspirational in nature, they realize that this is the way, that my health is really the foundation and the ceiling for all that I want to accomplish. So if your health, for example, is a 6 out of 10, then you can't show up as a father at an 8 out of 10. You can't show up as an entrepreneur as a 9 out of 10. Like, your health is the basic foundation and the ceiling for you. And once people realize that, they're like, yeah, like, okay, so if I want to be a 10 out of 10 dad, I've got to have 10 out of 10 health. Otherwise, if I'm showing up as a 4 out of 10 on the healthometer, then I can only show up as a 4 or less as a dad. So, my mission shifted, because I was at one point trying to change everyone's self-worth and trying to convince them. And now I realize, hey, let's go after the people that want it, because those are the people that are going to be living examples. They're going to refer other people just like them. And they're awake to the fact that nobody's going to come and save them. It's really on them to save themselves. So in teaching this to people, we kind of came up with 7 key foundational principles. And they, for the most part, they follow kind of the chakra system. So energetically, it's kind of easy to see. And we call this like how to heal from the ground up, essentially for free if you want to. But coaching helps you accelerate that growth faster, right? Just like anything, I can get really good at taking a jump shot, but it might take me 1,000,000 jump shots to figure it out, versus having a coach can see my mechanics and help me figure it out way sooner, so that I can accelerate my growth faster. So focusing on these 7, and maybe we can cover a few bonus ones. The first one is rest and recovery. So, as a functional medicine practitioner, we would have people come in and they would say, well, I want all the testing and I want to know exactly what supplements to take. And, then we'd start asking some questions about their self-care, and we'd realize they're up until like 2:00 in the morning watching TV, being exposed to blue light, EMF, stress, cortisol, all these things. And so the rest and recovery was off. And I feel that rest and recovery is not necessarily sexy, but it is the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, all you got to do is close your eyes and go to bed. I mean, how much easier can it get, right? We show up better, right, as partners and contributors to society when we're rested and recovered. And there's a reason that we're supposed to be resting and recovering for at least a third of our life. I mean, that's how important it is. And it's overlooked. In our Western culture, rest and recovery is a sign of weakness, right? When I tell people I go to bed at, 9 o'clock, Sometimes it raises eyebrows because they're like, oh my God, like that's when I'm watching TV, or that's when I'm winding down, and that's when I'm doing other things that are probably too stimulating. So we need that rest and recovery. It's the domino that knocks down the other dominoes. The next one is community. And, having that satsang, which is your fellowship of truth seekers, a like-minded community that's supportive of your goals and wants you to win, is very important. If you're eating healthy and your community is ridiculing you, then that's the wrong community, right? If you're eating that salad, or if you're eating nutritiously and people are kind of mocking you, or making you feel uncomfortable about it and bringing their own insecurities into your health journey, then that's not the right community for you, okay? The next one is a narrowed feeding window. So making sure that you're reducing the time that food is in your stomach. And that's not even to say you have to restrict calories, but it'll naturally restrict your calories when you're eating, 1 to 2 meals a day and avoiding snacking. So if you can do that, you're going to have a profound shift in your digestive physiology. And there's 5 principles when it comes to eating healthy. So when you are eating, you want to make sure you're following these 5 principles. The first one is to choose foods that help you become who you want to become. So choosing foods that are right for your body, and then also choosing how you want to feel about that food. So if somebody's eating a salad and viewing it as punishment, then they will change the vibrational frequency of their physiology and of the food. I mean, we have that capacity as human beings to do that. That's what, again, our brain is the most powerful instrument in the entire known universe. And so it can change, and it does change, the frequency of things around us, including other people. So the first one is choose how you feel about what you're eating and choose the right foods. The second one is to chew your food. We find that most people, especially if you're eating plant-based foods, it's very important that you chew your food, because that breaks open the cell wall, which is made up of cellulose. And we human beings lack the enzyme cellulase to actually digest through the cell wall. So if you don't chew your salad, you're going to poop your salad, and you're not going to get the nutrition out of it. The next one is to chill. So being in a chilled out state, and, being in a state of what we call parasympathetic state is very important. And then cherish, which is to be grateful for all the steps that went into that food preparation, not just the person that put the final touches on it and plated the food for you, but the people that grew the food, the people that nurtured that seed and raised that plant and harvested it and shipped it out to you. There's a lot of people involved in that process, and just kind of acknowledging that journey of that food is very important. The last one is to check. So you should be checking your stool daily, just for any visual changes, any undigested food, things like that you want to pay attention to. And then annually, it's probably good to get a stool test just to make sure you're not picking up any parasites, bugs, stealth infections that are disrupting your gut microbiome. The next one is loving awareness.
Before we go into the next one, I'm sorry. I wanted to go back to the window of eating and restricting your window eating time, because we will have a lot of clients come to us and say, I want to do intermittent fasting, or do you think that intermittent fasting is the best thing for me? And you're really going back to the core fundamentals of life, right? Chew your food, right? Like if you're not chewing your food and you're not absorbing, well, then you could take all of those supplements, but you're wasting what you already have. So in terms of the window, a lot of these things that we're talking about are really go back to the way things should be. You shouldn't be waking up at 5 a.m. necessarily and eating a huge full meal if you're going to go and meditate, or if you are watching TV until 10, 11, and 12 at night, you shouldn't be snacking on those foods at that time either. And if people start to make those changes and go back to what they should be doing before they go and do more extreme things, then everything kind of comes back into balance. So in terms of the intermittent fasting or restricting the window, you don't necessarily mean intermittent fasting. You mean what we should be doing in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's really like the foundations, right? And we can call it whatever we want, right? But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's how our body is best suited and in alignment. Like I just want to be clear that, intermittent fasting may not be right for everyone right now, right? Some people have poor blood sugar regulation. Some people have hormonal imbalances that need to be addressed. Some people, maybe their personal schedules may not allow for optimized meal timing, but really all studies point to the less we eat, the longer we live. So if we could take what we are eating and maximize its efficiency and its absorption, then that's the best place for us to start, because we're already eating. Why not eat properly, right? You're already chewing. Why not take those extra few chews and chew properly. Chewing does, just to kind of close that loop, chewing does a bunch of things. One, it creates a reflex. The gastrocolic reflex is when food's in our stomach, and it promotes peristalsis of the gut. We also have a signal that's being sent from the masseter muscles to the brain that says, hey, food is coming, which then starts shifting our nervous system into a more parasympathetic state, increasing blood flow to the digestive organs. And one thing that people need to know is that when we chew our food, it also helps us taste our food. And by tasting our food, it prepares our nervous system, or tells our nervous system to prepare our organs, like our pancreas, our stomach, our gallbladder, for what ratio of food's macros are coming down the pipe. This is why artificial colors and artificial flavors create problems for people, because the tongue and the brain thinks sugar is coming, but that sugar doesn't show up, and it's busy priming the system in order to make the enzymes that are required to digest it. Another big thing is stomach acid. So stomach acid is 1 million times more acidic than your blood. So making stomach acid is a very metabolically expensive and intensive process. And so by chewing our food, we're actually allowing our stomach, we're signaling to our stomach to increase secretions so that it can increase hydrochloric acid production. And that acid is going to then kill bacteria, parasites, and then further help us digest our proteins and break down those proteins into amino acids. So if you're eating a plant-based diet, then chewing is like so important. It's such a low-hanging fruit, because if you don't chew your food, then the food's going to pass right through you. All that nutrition is gone, and the ability for you to assimilate proteins is going to be diminished as well. So these are all like really simple considerations. People come to us and like, I tried this diet, this diet, this diet. I'm like, have you tried chewing your food? And they're like, no, nobody's told me that. And I'm like, okay, well, let's start there, because you're already eating. Let's just improve and optimize that process. We don't want you to do anything new. We want you to be intentional with the things that you're already doing.
Yeah, I was told actually 3 months ago that I wasn't chewing my food. And I'm like, of course I'm chewing my food. And then I went back and I paid closer attention, and I realized, sure, I'm taking 5 chews, but then I'm swallowing it down because I was rushing. I was rushing to get to other things. And I'm like, okay, if I could finish this food in 5 minutes instead of 15 minutes, then I've got an extra 10 minutes to go for a walk first, or go get back to work, or check on the kids.
Fast-paced.
And it was that fast-paced life was causing me to not chew my food. And she was able to see that in my tongue, right? It was so interesting. So you're talking to me right now. You're talking to me, but I've made a huge effort to sit down and take some breaths and definitely make sure that my food is chewed before it's swallowed, not just 5 times.
I noticed Adam's wearing some bracelets. So one of the things that you can do with your crystal bracelets is you can take it off while you're eating, and then just count 1 bead per bite. So that way it's bringing you into that intention. And usually most bracelets are going to have about 20 beads on them. So depending on the size of the crystal, but usually if you go around twice, then that's like 1 bite. Yeah, you should always be the last person up. Like when I speak at conferences, like I talk about this like really simple concept, and then you see like people will come up to me afterwards and be like, yes, I won. I was the last person done eating my meal. and that's how it should be, right? So think about cultures where it takes like 2 hours for a meal, right? So in our Western culture, it's really that intentionality of eating. Even if we were not to change our diet whatsoever, even if we were still eating like, let's say, hamburgers and fries, but being intentional, eating that food is going to set you up for, intestinal success, so to speak. So one thing, you mentioned is that, you're more intentional with your food, but you have to remember with your chewing, but you have to remember that the digestive process is just starting. It's kind of like a car wash, right? So there's several steps in a car wash, and each step depends on the previous step being done. And you can't go backwards, right? So your stomach doesn't have teeth. So it can't physically digest food. It has to enzymatically digest food. So that's why chewing is super important. Your small intestine doesn't have acid, right? So the enzymes are alkaline that are going to help you digest your carbohydrates, and then your bile. The only place you secrete bile is through the gallbladder and liver, and that happens further down. So each step is very, very critical and important. And so just remember that first bite we took, it's going to take about 2 hours for it to get through the system. So if we go from intentional eating and then right into a stressful situation, that digestive process is still taking place. And when we're under stress, you have an 80% decrease of blood flow to the digestive organs. So, where we send flow is where we send function. So the intention should not be to, and not that you're doing this necessarily, but for the listeners, the intention should be, okay, I'm going to be really intentional with my meal. And then as soon as I put my meal away, I'm going to go into a stressful situation, because it's going to take another 2 hours for that last bite to work its way through the digestive organs before, and all those nutrients and macros are going to be broken down and assimilated.
So our daughter's going to be excited because she's always the last one up from the table. We're halfway cleaned up and she's still eating. So she'll be excited to hear that she's winning. And I guess, when you look at Middle Eastern countries and, some of the hotter countries, even Mexico, where you have that siesta, right? So you go and you have off from 12 to 3. So you take your time eating your meal, and then you go and you have some relaxing time before you need to go back to work. That seems extremely connected right now for me.
It's so interesting, because in our Western culture, that would be viewed as laziness, right? And if we look at physiology, it's actually a form of aligning with your physiology. Because if I'm out and about, let's say I have my meal and then I'm out and about, I'm walking, I'm doing all these things, moving around. Well, I'm sending now blood to my arms and legs. So the blood that was going to my trunk organs is now going to my arms and legs, because when we're in a sympathetic or more cortisol driven state, which is pretty much our lives, right? Unless we're like at rest, then we're shunting blood away from the core organs. So like really interesting fun fact I learned is that at rest, 50% of your blood flow goes to your liver and kidneys. So half of your blood goes to your liver and kidneys when you're at rest. When you're in fight or flight, only 5% of your blood goes to your liver and kidneys. So when people are on detox programs and they're trying to improve their health, they want to take all these shakes and pills and potions. But if they're not parasympathetic by their physiological state, then they're going to be not sending blood to those organs. So it's like they're watering the grass in the front, expecting the grass in the backyard to start growing, right? It just doesn't make sense. We've got to shift where we're sending blood, because that's where we'll send more function. Kind of brings me to the next point, which is loving awareness. And loving awareness is really about loving ourselves, creating a life that we love, creating a heart center that emanates positivity. And that could be through mindfulness, through meditation. We do something called heart math training with our clients. So we teach them how to use their breath to align their brain and their heart and get into a state of coherence. And when they're in that state of coherence, all of their healing systems in their body turn on. So if we look at where blood flow goes under times of stress, it goes to the arms and legs. And what that means is it takes blood away from the trunk organs. And if you look at most chronic diseases develop in the trunk organs. And it's because there isn't that nutrient exchange, that oxygenation, that blood flow and lymphatic drainage that's taking place in those organ systems. So by teaching people how to breathe, we're able to move lymph. So the biggest lymph nodes in our body are actually underneath our diaphragm. And so if people are constantly taking shallow breaths, it's going to create toxic sludge accumulating in their body. We produce 12 liters of lymph every single day. And that's where most chronic health challenges start, is if we can't move this waste. So teaching people how to breathe gets them into a more coherent state, shifts their physiology to be more parasympathetic. And now they have a tool that they can bring into their awareness at any given moment. We talk about things like mouth taping at night to help increase nitric oxide production. We talk about we can actually have psychedelic breakthrough experiences with people using appropriate cadences and types of breathing techniques. And then we can measure it. So we have something called a heart math that our clients use, where they can actually get instantaneous feedback. So there's this feedback loop, so they can see how their breath is actually changing their physiology. So loving awareness is a big part of what we teach. The next one is joyful movement. And joyful movement is doing things you love. Moving in a way that excites you as opposed to a way that you dread. So some people are going to be like, well, I hate going to the gym. Well, okay, well, that's okay. Don't go to the gym. I love going to the gym, right? And I actually miss it right now because of everything that's going on. And some people love yoga. Some people love, find what you love, find what you look forward to instead of something that you dread, because the anxiety of, oh my God, I got to go to the gym at 6 o'clock today, that puts you in that sympathetic dominant state, right? It changes your physiology. A lot of people we find nowadays, because they're already sympathetic dominant, too much exercise can actually make them even more sympathetic dominant and actually have a negative effect on their health. So we find that less is more oftentimes, especially focusing on rest, recovery, reducing calorie intake, really getting into that parasympathetic healing regenerative state, really amplifies the ability for somebody to heal. So we like things like restorative yoga. We like things like Tai Chi, breath work. These are forms of joyful movement that push us more into that parasympathetic state without creating a lot of tissue damage, so to speak. The next part that we focus on is this guy up here, which is the mind, and or gal, depending on the person. And we also focus on hormones. So that the two biggest and maybe the one most important hormone is cortisol. Cortisol's main function in our physiology is to actually raise blood sugar. So it's not a stress hormone, it's a blood sugar raising hormone. And the implications of that are quite huge because that leads to something called insulin resistance. If our cortisol is high all the time, and that insulin resistance then leads to swinging of all kinds of different hormones. So if I had to pick one hormone or one thing to measure, it would be blood sugar. So one thing we have people do is actually wear a continuous glucose monitor, which they're available over the counter now. Wear one for a couple of weeks, and you can gamify the process of balancing your blood sugar. And in a short period of time, people can see what emotional states affect their blood sugar, what exercises and movement patterns affect their blood sugar, and how sleep affects their blood sugar. And if we can get blood sugar balanced, then we start balancing naturally all the other hormones. So cortisol is that one domino, and blood sugar is one way to measure cortisol in a non-invasive way. And a continuous glucose monitor gives us a lot of data points to work with. So it tracks your blood sugar, every 15 minutes. And in doing so, we can have data to see, how did that interview affect me? How did that exercise affect me? How did that meal affect me? And what are the implications of that? We have people that once they put these units on, they become self-regulating. So they start managing their diet themselves. Even some of the most stubborn people will start, because the process is now gamified, they'll be able to self-regulate and be like, hey, nobody has to tell me. My body's telling me what's going on. And they can track it and measure it. We also focus on the Hpa axis, and that's your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The Hpa axis is kind of the master regulator. The hypothalamus regulates our appetite, regulates our body temperature, regulates a lot of attributes of our thyroid and adrenal health and our sex hormone function. So instead of focusing on the downstream problems of low testosterone or excess cortisol or dysfunctional thyroid, we go upstream to the hypothalamus because that's the master regulator. And that naturally helps people start feeling better. And the last one is really our autonomic pairing. And autonomic pairing is essentially pairing our nervous system with the task that we're trying to accomplish. And what that means is if I'm eating a meal, then I want to send blood flow to my trunk. I want to send blood flow to my digestive organs. If I'm lifting weights, I want to send blood flow to my legs and my arms because that's what makes the most sense, right? If I'm working out and all the blood's going to my digestive system, I'm going to start cramping. I'm going to start having some problems. And this is very important. So if I want to enhance and promote my creativity, then I can do certain types of modalities and breath work to get to that state. If I want to improve my digestion, there's things I can do to be intentional to pair my nervous system with what I'm trying to accomplish. If, for example, if you're trying to do some creative work, but you're in a stressful state, then you're not going to be very creative because you're not accessing that aspect of your brain. You're accessing the part of your brain that makes you reactionary, right? So when we're in stress, which a lot of people might be these days, then our brain is primed to be reactive. So if a lion walks into this room, I want my brain to be reactive. I don't want to overthink the situation. How old is a lion to come up with, draw out a master plan of how I'm going to escape? I just want to be able to get away as quickly as possible without having to overthink it. So we have this mechanism that is primed for survival, but if we stay in that state, then it's choking out our creativity. And our creativity happens when we're in a parasympathetic state.
There's so much good information there. There's so much to go on, and everything makes sense. Everything's going back to the root cause, right? Why use something external when you can adjust what you're doing already and make it all function properly? So for people who are, their adrenals and their cortisol levels are going way up right now, trying to say, oh my God, how am I going to do all this at once? Where's the one spot that you recommend that people start with today?
Well, I would say go to bed early. That's that sets the stage for everything else. And, you can start shifting your bedtime 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be dramatic or drastic. But I would say that rest and recovery is the lowest hanging fruit, because that puts us in a better place to wake up tomorrow feeling more energized and more inspired and have our neurotransmitters firing properly. The brain actually goes through a little car wash every night when we go to bed. And if we're not allowing that to happen because we're eating too late at night or we're going to bed too late at night, then we're not going to feel focused and we're not going to feel our absolute best. Now, I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I hope that that's not coming across here, but there are tools that we can use to track our activity and our sleep. So I wear something called an Oura Ring. And this is something that we also give to our clients now, because it helps them self-monitor, helps them become self-aware. Kind of like, in Terminator 2, when Skynet becomes self-aware, it's really our turn to become self-aware. And there's wearable technology that's really affordable. There's ways to kind of gamify this process, because our brain works really well at gamification. And really, we have to buy into this idea that nobody's going to save us unless we're willing to save ourselves, right? If somebody's drowning and they want to be saved, it's easy. It's not easy, but it's easier to save them. But if they want to drown, then it's like almost impossible, right? So we have to be very mindful ourselves of which category we want to fall into. Are we that person that wants to be helped and served? Because there's so many people like yourselves, like myself, like the practitioners that we coach, that want to help people. And there's certainly an uprising and a movement there that's taking place. So it's easier than ever now to get the help that you're looking for, as long as you're coachable and teachable. And there's a key distinction there. So teachability is the willingness to learn, right? And I think that a lot of people these days are willing to learn, but coachability is a willingness to receive and actually take feedback and then do something about it. So those two factors are really important. What's the coachability and teachability index of myself if I'm willing to grow and expand and do something a little bit different. So the lowest hanging fruit is sleep. I mean, there's three really low hanging fruits that don't cost you anything. And really everything we talked about today, unless you buy the tools, doesn't really cost you anything. The first one is sleep, right? So if we look at children when they don't feel well, there's three things that they naturally instinctually do. And then as adults, we kind of override that system. So the first one is sleep, right? So close your eyes, take a nap, put that in part of your day if you need it. It's okay to rest as much as you need to, especially in the winter. The days are much shorter. If you study nature and follow it as a guide, then most animals are waking up with the sun, right? Virtually all of them. Their circadian rhythm is in alignment with the sunrise and sunset. In our culture, we have light bulbs. So the average person used to sleep 10 hours a night before they invented light bulbs. Now the average person sleeps about 7 hours a night. And those 3 hours aren't filled with yoga and meditation and drum circles and chanting and stuff like that. It's filled with more stress. It's filled with more sympathetic dominant activities. So, really shifting and focusing on that rest and recovery and viewing it as a superpower instead of a weakness is one place to start. The other one is fasting. When children are unwell, they don't want to eat. As much as we want to shove food down their throat, they don't want to eat, because what they're doing is their body's telling them, hey, let me take care of this. Let me take care of whatever's going on inside of you instead of digesting your food. So anytime we eat, it draws energy away from our healing mechanisms, because now we're drawing that energy into our digestive mechanisms. So fasting is a very powerful tool. And if you're interested in fasting, then it doesn't cost you anything, right? And basically you can take 1 day a week, or maybe start with 1 day a month, where for 24 hours you don't eat anything. Okay. And so that could be a powerful tool for healing. And the last one is silence. So really going out in nature and not just walking through the woods, but being in the woods. So spending time sitting with the trees. Like, nature is the most balanced, most parasympathetic place that you can be. And it's full of fractals. We didn't talk about that today, but it's full of fractals. And that's the architecture of life, is all built on fractal geometry. So if we're staring at a flat screen, if you look at anything that's man-made, it's smooth, it's perfect. It's like the corners are all square. There's nothing in nature that's like that. And so our brain is a fractal system. Our body is a fractal system. Plants are fractal systems. So immersing yourself in those environments is actually recoding your body and recoding your nervous system. So it's resetting it to factory settings. So spending more time outdoors, even in the cold days, staring at the trees, staring at the leaves, even staring at the bark of a tree, reactivates these subconscious systems in our body for healing.
There's so much information. There's so many great nuggets that you've shared, and we appreciate that. We could actually dive into each of these core principles in so much more detail. Sachin, we need to respect everybody's time, and our listeners might want to reach out to you to get more information from you. So where would you like them to go that we can put into the show notes for them?
I appreciate you asking. So I actually created a tool a while ago when I realized I can't help everybody one-on-one. And instead, what I did is I packaged up 30 of my best tips. So if you enjoyed some of the nuggets today, then I unpack some of these things in a 30-day program, and it's absolutely free. So if people go to 30in30.org, 30in30.org, www, obviously, then they'll be able to access 30 days of nuggets that I've picked up over the years. The same stuff that I would tell my clients if they were paying me to give me my best advice. I just packaged it up, and I'm happy to offer that to all the listeners today.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you taking the time to be here on the Plant Trainers Podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the Plant Trainers Podcast. We want to make sure that you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or any other podcasting platform.
We really appreciate the feedback we receive from you. Every time we get a 5-star rating or review on iTunes from one of our fans, it really helps other people find us just like you did.
Thanks so much to our patrons. To become a patron, visit us at patreon.com/planttrainers. Even supporting us with $1 really makes a difference in the quality of the show.
And don't forget to connect with us on Instagram and Twitter. Our handle is @PlantTrainers. Like Plant Trainers on Facebook, join our newsletter, and check out our website at planttrainers.com for awesome recipes, a list of our services, and of course, our latest podcast.
We encourage you to email your questions to info@planttrainers.com so that we can help you improve your quality of life through nutrition and fitness.
So we hope we've inspired you today. Join us again next time and have a healthy day. Or is that too corny?
It's a little cheesy.